This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Not everyone is careful with your personal information, which might explain why there's a victim of identity theft every 5 seconds in the U.S. Fortunately, there's LifeLock. LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats to your identity. If your identity is stolen, a U.S.-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year by visiting lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
This is the Roger Stone Show, presented by Colonial Metals Group.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone.
Now, here's Roger Stone.
Welcome back. This is the Roger Stone Show, and now we are joined by Colonel Douglas Macgregor. Colonel Macgregor is a decorated combat veteran and author of 5 books. He holds a Ph.D. and is recognized as a defense and foreign policy expert. Colonel Macgregor was commissioned in the regular Army in 1976 after 1 year at VMI and 4 years at West Point. He ultimately retired with the rank of colonel, but most importantly, Colonel Macgregor is widely known and respected inside the United States, Europe, Israel, Russia, China, and Korea for his leadership in the Battle of 73 Easting, the U.S. Army's largest battle since World War II. Doug Macgregor is a shrewd geopolitical and geomilitary analyst, and I'm proud to have him on the show today. Should also mention that he is the chief executive officer of OurCountryOurChoice.com and also active with an important new platform, Republic.us. Colonel Macgregor, thank you for joining us on the Roger Stone Show.
Hey, thanks, Roger. Good to be with you.
I have really come to enjoy the text you send me because it's one of the few ways I can keep up with current international affairs. You sent me a message the other day that said there are currently no plans to hold an in-depth meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and U.S. President-elect Donald Trump. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told TASS, their state news agency. So far, there have been no real impulses, he said, answering the question if there was the possibility for a meeting before Trump's inauguration, or if there had been no specific or causes for in-person contacts. Colonel Macgregor, what do you think is going on here?
Well, I think based upon the comments that President Trump made within the last 24 hours, that the Russians have made certain things very clear. The war is lost in Ukraine. The Ukrainians are finished. Contrary to the lies told in the West, the Russians have not taken heavy casualties, but the Ukrainians have. And in fact, the Ukrainian nation, let alone the state, is in danger of going out of business. They want to bring this to an end. They've always been open to negotiation, but they've made it abundantly clear that the number one condition for any discussion is that Ukraine will not now or ever in the future become a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Alliance. And that's not up for discussion. And the second part is that the Russians would like an agreement that clarified where U.S. forces are going to be, where their forces are going to be. In other words, to go back to the kind of mechanism that we had in the 1990s, where we informed each other of where we were going to conduct operations, of where our troops were, and so forth. And remember, they're very discouraged because we effectively walked out of all of the arms control limitations talks. We abandoned the various treaties, the INF, SALT, and so forth, and they want to get back to a predictable environment, if you will, that also recognizes their legitimate national security interests. I think President Trump has begun to understand that based upon his remarks earlier within the last 24 hours. But unless those things are made very clear, I don't think the Russians are going to waste any time talking to us or anybody else.
Well, Colonel Macgregor, as you know, our country is in violation of two agreements we've made, the Budapest Memorandum and the Minsk Accords, where we both said that we would, in both we said that we would not push Ukraine into NATO, not an inch east, as I think Secretary of State James Baker said. And the Russians' fundamental objection has always been to NATO missiles on the ground pointed at Russia, funded by us, most likely, supplied by us, or bioweapons labs. This is an interesting question in itself. We both heard the Assistant Secretary of State blurt out in a congressional hearing that indeed there were bioweapons labs, and she tried to walk it back. What is your opinion on whether these labs actually exist on the ground in Ukraine?
Well, we know that there were at least 23 operational biolabs, or many, many more. We invested heavily in them, and we know that research was being conducted to examine the potential to develop a weapon that would be targeted against Slavs, Eastern Slavs. In other words, using the DNA and formulating presumably some bioweapon that would cause people with the Eastern Slavic DNA to become ill or simply die. Now, you can imagine what the impact of this has been on the Russians themselves. I mean, the Russians do not view us as the enemy. They do now, but they did not several years ago. They thought that we were actually going to improve relations with them. They did have high hopes when President Trump was in office the last time, but then they saw that despite what President Trump said, the people in the bureaucracy, what a lot of people call the deep state, simply ratcheted up the sanctions. So at this point, I just think they don't believe us. They don't take us seriously. They're interested in actions, not rhetoric. And I still think they're hopeful that when President Trump takes office, that he will demonstrate very conclusively that he wants good relations, not hostile relations with Moscow. Let's hope so.
Well, one thing is for certain, Donald Trump knows that you don't conduct sensitive negotiations in public, and therefore we have no way of knowing what is in fact in his mind. I do think he has the best prospect. This administration has no peace talks going at all, has no negotiations, has no contact. They and our State Department under Antony Blinken won't let the Ukrainians have any dialogue with the Russians. Both at this juncture, I suspect both countries would like the killing to stop. People forget that Joe Biden blurted out very early before this war began that he would have been prepared to give the Donbass back to Russia in negotiations, but they would like us to forget all of that. I am interested on your take on Syria. I have a hard time understanding why we're better off with the toppling of the Assad regime. The last time the people who have now taken control of the country had control of the country, hundreds of thousands of Christians were slaughtered. Children as young as 5 were literally crucified. Yet our CIA seems to have funded and executed this as quickly as possible before Donald Trump came to office. I don't see how this makes for a stabler region. Your take on this, Colonel Macgregor?
Well, Roger, the Israel lobby working closely to buy up support in the House and the Senate, and also the CIA, which is now heavily infiltrated with Israel lobby supporters, has worked closely with the Mossad to bring about the demise of Mr. Assad. And to be frank, if you compare the people that are now in charge with Assad, Assad begins to look a lot like Santa Claus. In other words, whatever you didn't like about Assad and whatever was unfavorable shrinks to insignificance next to what you just described. I mean, I've been watching videos of slave markets in Damascus involving vast numbers of women, Sunni Muslims, Yazidi, Christians, whatever, being sold into slavery, sexual slavery, in the open by members of HTS and effectively this government. That is the proverbial tip of the iceberg. But there's something even more damaging and disturbing that I think some of the people I know in the senior ranks of the Israeli armed forces, I'm sure, are very concerned about right now because they're competent people. And that is that Israel now is effectively sharing a border with Turkey. The winner strategically in this tragic outcome is really Mr. Erdogan in Turkey. Mr. Erdogan regards Syria as historically part of the Turkish Empire. He regards the cities, for the most part, in northern Iraq as part of the Turkish Empire. And he's made it abundantly clear that he intends on consolidating his gains in Syria by eliminating the Kurdish threat to Turkey. And we, as you know, have been backing the Kurds for many years. And I fear that we will ultimately abandon the Kurds because we have no interest in going to war with Turkey. Remember, as a military power in the region, it's enormously strong. And now Turkish forces are going to end up on Israel's border. And the Turks are ferociously anti-Israeli. They have become more so as a result of the Gaza mass murder and expulsion crusade. Israel has no friends left in the region at all. Everyone has walked away from them. And the Turks are going to pose a real danger to the very existence of Israel, at least as much, and I would argue a lot more, than Iran.
We're going to go to a quick commercial break, and then we'll be back with Colonel Douglas Macgregor in just a moment.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Mic check. 1, 2. Are we recording? Hi, I'm Michelle Bernstein, an award-winning chef, restaurateur, and mom. I have a lot on my plate, including my psoriatic arthritis symptoms. That's why I was prescribed Cosentyx. It helps me move better.
Cosentyx secukinumab is prescribed for people 2 years of age and older with active psoriatic arthritis. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentyx. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some were fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur. Learn more at 1-844-COSENTYX or Cosentyx.com.
Ask your rheumatologist about Cosentyx.
Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush, and Donald Trump.
They went after a guy named Roger Stone, who's sitting in the office. And I'll say this in front of Roger, he's no baby. And right now, he's cleaner than anybody in this place. Now, they treated him very unfairly.
All of these presidents relied on one man to secure their seat in the Oval Office. That man is Roger Stone.
Roger Stone.
This is the Roger Stone Show, presented by Colonial Metals Group. Now, here's Roger Stone.
And we're back. We're talking to Colonel Douglas Macgregor, who served as senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense, a post he held until President Donald Trump left office. He is a distinguished combat veteran and a man I listen to on all of these geopolitical and geomilitary events. I'm very proud that he can join us today. Colonel Macgregor, let us take us, if we may, to another region of the world. As you know, President Donald Trump had harsh sanctions in place on the Iranians that seemed to keep them in check. Even their Chinese patrons would not buy their oil. They were literally, according to public and private reports, on the verge of bankruptcy until this current administration, fulfilling a policy objective of the Obama administration, unfroze hundreds of billions of dollars of assets with which, at a minimum, they were able to begin once again to finance Islamic terrorism. But I would suspect, if they don't already have a nuclear device, to begin their program to develop one again. Do you expect that if, as President Trump returns to office, that he will put these sanctions back in place, or is it kind of like closing the barn door after the horse has escaped?
I think the horse, along with a lot of the horses that were in the barn, have long since left. I don't think that the sanctions were as effective as claimed. I think a lot of that is informed by wishful thinking. This current Iranian president is probably the most pro-Western, pro-American leader that they've ever had. And one of the promises he made to the electorate was that he was going to try and develop a new relationship with the United States. That, of course, has been impossible. Iran has been selected as Israel's blood enemy, and the Israelis want it to be destroyed, and they're demanding that we help them do it. And as I tried to point out, Iran may be a problem, but you've got problems now with the Turks that are at least as dangerous. We destroyed the stability in the region when we destroyed Syria. We opened Pandora's box. Everyone is at risk now. Egypt is on the verge of exploding. Jordan is. The Islamist forces that are running amok in Syria are heading towards Iraq and Jordan. The Muslim Brotherhood, which is headed by Mr. Erdogan, is virulently anti-Israeli and anti-Western, and they are coming out from underneath their rocks to contribute to instability in Jordan and Egypt as well. The Saudis have left us. They've buried the hatchet with Iran. They're working closely with the Chinese and the Russians. This is not a good situation to be in. One of the things, though, that President Trump has to think about is the requirement to largely disengage. There's a lot of damage that's occurred that he can't fix. And in connection to that, Roger, let me mention something that President Trump needs to understand very well. I was talking to a senior officer who has been operating with industry for the last several years. He's of my vintage. And he called me to tell me, he said, look, Doug, you've got to get this to the president. We have exhausted our ammunition stocks, exhausted our stocks of missiles and rockets. Much of our warfighting equipment has been lost. It's been shipped to and destroyed in Ukraine or simply squandered or sold on the black market by the Ukrainians. If we are sucked into a major regional war in Saudi Arabia, we will, or the Arabian Peninsula or the Middle East with Iran, whatever, we'll run out of conventional munitions very, very quickly. We're not postured to fight. I think when he gets in there, he's going to have to realize that the senior officers who are paid by the American people to manage ammunition, missiles, rockets, warfighting equipment, capabilities, troops, he's got to get rid of them. They have failed miserably in their constitutional duties. They should have stood up a long time ago and warned clearly what the consequences were for what this administration has done in Ukraine. And they should have resigned if they were not heeded. What we have now are a group of sycophants at the top. He shouldn't keep any of them around. He's got to get rid of all of them. And it's a very simple process. You simply tell your secretaries of services, inform the 4 stars that they want their papers, that it's time for them to retire. And if they don't have 3 years on station, submit your papers and I'll consider you for a waiver. This is not personal. This is not about hating someone or disliking someone or liking someone because they make you feel good. You're removing people who have failed miserably to keep the armed forces in shape, to keep their morale up, to preserve the discipline, and most important, to reserve the warfighting capability. So when we talk about Iran, we talk about Turkey. It's rising now as a great power in the Middle East. We are not in a position to threaten people and carry through on those threats because we don't have the conventional military power to do it. We will still be a nuclear power in the future. But this man estimated, and I trust his judgment, I've known him for many years, estimated it would take us 10 years to recover from the loss of the ammunition and the warfighting equipment in Ukraine.
Sober talk from our guest, Colonel Douglas Macgregor. Colonel Macgregor, with about 2 minutes to go, tell us about Our Country, Our Choice.com.
Well, Our Country, Our Choice is really an organization that sprang up because a lot of people concluded that neither the Republican nor the Democratic parties actually faithfully represented their interests, that we need a new party. But before you can build a new party, you have to have an organizational construct in place that recruits people who are basically nationalists. It's not a question of this or that party. It's a question of the survival of our republic and our country, and coming together around the key issues to get out of these endless wars that we should stop fighting, that we can't afford and can't sustain. Focus here at home. Get control of the border. Deal with the cartel threat inside the country. Restore the rule of law. All of those things have to happen if we're going to do what President Trump discusses when he mentions the deportations, which are vital and essential. But you got to get that border under control, and it's going to take military power to do it.
All right, folks, check. Okay, we're going to have to move along. Folks, check out OurCountryOurChoice.com. Many thanks to Colonel Douglas Macgregor for joining us today on The Roger Stone Show.
Thanks, and happy.
Crazy about a shark, yes, man.
At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Ranked #1 in innovation for 10 consecutive years and #2 among public universities for employability. ASU isn't just ahead of the curve, it's creating new paths to success. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online, that's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.